Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. We're going through Genesis, and now today we're going to finish chapter 4. And there's not much there in Genesis, but we're going to continue going over to the other text. We're looking at Josephus, Jasher, Jubilees, eventually the Seder Olam, any other ancient Jewish text that might tell us something, and go forward from there. Dead Sea Scrolls, Church Fathers. So let's go ahead and get started. And again, we'll make a playlist out of this, but this will be the second half of chapter 4. So if we go to Genesis, start with verse 17, a little bit of overlap. So we've had the 7 days of creation. We've had the expulsion from the garden. We've had the story of Cain and Abel. And now we're getting into the rest of it. So verse 17 of chapter 4. So Genesis chapter 4. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he built a city, and they called the name of that city after the name of his son, Enoch. So he has a child named Enoch. This is not the guy that is of the godly line of Seth, the guy that writes the book of Enoch. This is a different Enoch. And then he eventually goes somewhere, builds a city, and calls it after his name. We talked a little bit about the city. Some of the ancient texts called it an underground city. And most likely it's somewhere in the Anti-Lebanese mountains, or should I say underneath. So anyway, be interesting if somebody could do some excavations there. What I think is interesting is nobody believes any of the old legends, and then once in a great while someone will say, I believe it, and goes and finds it. Like Troy, everybody thought that Troy was a myth until Schliemann, hard to say his name, decided it wasn't a myth and put texts together and went to figure out what mountain range and eventually found it. So, father of archaeology. So, interesting on these things. So, verse 18 said, and unto Enoch was born Irad. So what we're going to do is start going down the list. We don't have any dates on these things because these guys were all wiped out. But there's an important piece in here. Remember, Moses is making a very, very, very stripped down synopsis of ancient history just to hit the high points and show you how they were connected. So in this case, Cain has a son named Enoch. He goes somewhere to the land of Nod. He builds a city called Enoch. And then later on, Enoch has a child, and we just go down that genealogy. So to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was born Methuselah. Methuselah begot Methusiel. Methusiel begot Lamech. Now Lamech took unto himself 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. So these were 2 sisters. And he took, and it was we're not sure exactly, but it's in that lineage somewhere. And it says Ada bare Jabal. Now there's a whole story about the births and stuff like that we'll cover in a little bit. But basically, long story short, he takes 2 wives, and the 2 wives have kids. Ada bears Jabal, or Jubal, short for Jubilee. Okay. He was the father of all that such that dwell in tents and as such that have cattle. So as far as human beings go, he's credited for being the guy that invented cattle farming, okay, and dwelling in tents. So it's very, very beginning, not finding a cave and dwelling in there, but actually out in the field somewhere dwelling in tents. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and the organ. So in other words, he was the inventor of music. Now, what's interesting is when we get to it, we'll look a little bit into the book of Enoch that tells us some of these things, like the music and some of the other things, were invented by angels. So when you're talking about just the genealogy, and we need to also look at a text called the Tana Shemyaza, which is a very ancient text we've got from the Geniza, which talks about the life story of the fallen angel Shemyaza. That's got some interesting things to it. But altogether, if we pull this together, if the fallen angels are the one that came and invented how you make brass, how you make certain musical instruments, make up wars, weapons, things like that. And then we come here and it says these guys were the father of a certain kind of musical instrument or a certain kind of martial art or a certain kind of weapon or whatever. If weapons in general have already been taken care of, that means the fallen angels have already come and these guys are building on the technology. So what we're going to see is the whole concept of the fallen angels trading technology for the ability to do genetic tampering. So trade technology for your women, that kind of thing, or for cattle or for other things. And this is what's going on. So this gives us a clue of when this stuff happens. Now, the old texts talk about the fall of the 200 angels, which is what we're talking about. It'll be detailed in chapter 6, occurs in the lifetime of Jared, Enoch's father, on the Seth side. So what you can do is go back when it talks about in the days of somebody, it's between the time when they were born and when their firstborn son was born. Because before they're born, they're not here, of course, but after they have a firstborn son, then it's the days of that guy. If you're talking, kind of think of it as genealogies or dynasties, so to speak. So as soon as somebody's born, it's his days. In England, Europe, they'd probably go by whenever they became king. And whenever the next guy became king, that's how a dynasty works. So somewhere in that neighborhood, so it's around 400 a.m. to 600 a.m. is when the angels came. At this point, then sometime thereafter, technology's traded and these things happen. So the guy, Jabal, invents the dwelling in tents and cattle. Jubal is the father of all that handle the harp and the organ. So harp and organs, basically keyed or stringed instruments. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, and then it says Zillah. So this was Ada, has these two kids. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain, and he was the instructor of every artificer of brass and iron. So again, if the fallen angels are the ones that taught how to make brass or find and take the ore and make brass and iron per se, then that's already happened. And he's the father of this as far as taking it. Artificer means to make something else of it. So instead of just iron in general, he's making different kinds of swords, different kinds of shields to figure out which would be best. So he's an artificer, a designer in things brass and iron, not necessarily of just weapons. It could be other things too, but whatever you would use brass or iron for. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Now this is interesting when we get to the text later. Enoch's daughter or granddaughter, I forget exactly, but in the lineage of Enoch, of the Seth line, is the woman that Noah marries. Now Noah marries Naamah. Naamah was a godly woman, in some texts called a prophetess. This is the opposite. So we have two Enochs, we have two Lamechs, we have two Naamahs, we have two, of just about everybody. So there's like an evil one and a good one. One follows God, one follows the teachings of the fallen angels. So this is the other one. This lady was considered to be a sorceress. Same thing, dealing with, instead of worshiping God and receiving visions from God, she's working with angels. So anyway, we'll get to all that later. But this is what's going on here in this part. Okay, and so Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. He's got something really important to tell them. Ye wives of Lamech, hearken to my speech. I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain will be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. And so we look at these two verses, and a lot of times we think, I have no clue what's going on here. Apparently he killed somebody, and because he killed somebody, he's going to be avenged 70 times what Cain would have done. Okay, that gives us a clue because he's the guy that accidentally kills Cain. And this is talking about the lineage. So we're talking about Cain starting everything, his lineage going on, and then how he dies. And then we switch in chapter 5 to the godly line of Seth during that same time period. And we'll get to more details on exactly how this event occurred. So he's saying if sevenfold, it could be 70 and sevenfold. Now this would be interesting to look at prophetic wise, because we saw the other day, last week actually, when we looked at Cain dying, the curse rather, God said that they would be, if anyone tries to kill Cain, he'd be avenged sevenfold, is what it says in our Hebrew Old Testament Genesis. I think it was Josephus made the comment that it meant generations. So he would be protected until the 7th generation. So we're thinking 7th generation is Lamech. Lamech accidentally kills him. And then with that in mind, if that's a true concept, that's what Josephus said. If that's a true concept, 7 generations, what are 77 generations? Well, sevenfold. I guess 7 times 7, so 49 generations. So be kind of interesting to see. So when you get to the 50th, if each generation is the same thing as a jubilee, that would get us to the date of the Exodus, so the beginning of Israel after the end of the age. So there could be a prophecy kind of thing in there somewhere. Okay, so anyway, we'll come back and look at Josephus and Jasher's account of those. So then it says, Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son and called his name Seth. For God said she, has appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. Remember, we have to have a godly line. We have to have a priesthood. Both Cain and Abel were studying for priesthood, knew how to do things. Cain killed Abel, so Abel's out of the picture. Abel hadn't had any children yet, so his lineage is gone. Cain, of course, is banished, so there is no godly line now. So now they have another child, which is called Seth, and we're going to have the Seth line. So we're going to see how that goes. So there's a lot of prophecy and a lot of things connected with Seth. And so we'll go on from there. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos, because then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So what we're going to find out as we get to the text is about this time with Cain and his group adding up or growing more, there becomes a massive falling away from the Lord. Men begin to do their own idols and things like that. And in Enos's time, there was a small revival. And so we're going to look at this. There's 3 major revivals pre-flood. And we're going to look at the text and see if we can figure out a pattern, and then how that might fit in revivals in the end times. So this is the point here. So you can see why Moses is pulling just these things out, because he's saying, okay, here is, after all of that, Cain went out and started his group, and then here's the group. And in these guys' time is when the fallen angels came, which we'll talk about later. And then he makes these things and mentions Naamah, the sorceress, and not the other one. And then Lamech, and these 2 verses here, how Cain dies. Everybody would have known this stuff, but he's just saying, okay, this, then this, then this. Then we get to the end. Or then we get to Moses, And then Adam knows his wife again and has Seth. Seth is a godly line, and from Seth began his son Enos, and that's a derivative of Anashim, just meaning men. But at that time, men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So the first small revival happens. So the ancient Hebrews would have known all these history stories. It would have said, okay, that's when that happened. That must have been when that happened. Okay, so it was in that area. So that's what we're trying to do, is build it in ancient history. So let's look at this here. First, we'll go to the book of Jasher, and there's not much here for this time period. Starting in verse 33, it says, and came, right here in 33 rather, it says, and the time Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, from the place where he was, he went moving and wandering in the land east of Eden, he and all belonging to him. And Cain knew his wife in those days, and she conceived and bare a son that they called the name Enoch, saying, at that time the Lord began to give him rest and quiet in the earth. Now, Enoch actually means, Hanach means dedicated. So I'm not sure how it goes in with quiet and rest, but I guess the idea of wandering in your strength and finally being able to dedicate yourself to one place, which is to rest a little bit. Okay, so the curse is beginning to be lifted at that point. Okay, and then it says, at that time Cain began also to build a city, and he built a city and called the name of the city Enoch, after the name of his own son. In those days the Lord had given him rest upon the earth, and he did not move about and wander as in the beginning. So this is much, much later in time. Not like hundreds of years necessarily, but a good amount. And Irad was born to Iraq, and Irad begot Methusiel. Notice this is a Y instead of a J, but same thing. Methusiel got Methusiel. Okay, so it ends at that point. So at this point, then, it will start off with Seth being born. It was in the 130th year of the life of Adam on the earth that he again knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bare a son in the likeness of his image, and they called his name Seth, saying, because God had appointed me another in place of Abel, for Cain has slain him. So we will get the same number about in the 130th year in the life of Adam. We'll get that in chapter 5 of Genesis, because it gives us the same exact dates. So when Adam was 130. Now this is interesting, because a lot of people will say they believe the Bible, everything about it, but when it comes to numbers, they don't believe it. And what's interesting to me is it's actually very straightforward. There really was a creation week where God created everything, not in millions of years, but in a day. And during that week, the calendar starts, and then Adam's created on the 6th day of that week. And you have this calendar going. Well, people say, well, I don't know if he was in the Garden of Eden for a day or a million years, but it's probably after he fell, this kind of thing. No, according to the text, according to the Essenes, Adam was created on a certain day of a certain year. Well, that's day one of year one, but there's a real time where he's created. From the time he was created, just like if we were born, he wasn't born, he was created, but same basic idea. From the time he was created, that 6th day of creation week, to where he was 130 years, no more, no less, it's in that year, Seth was born. And we can begin to add these up. And again, they're dynasty type calculations. So you don't even really need to calculate and say, well, give or take a year for each one of these guys. It's actually very clear. We'll see that in chapter 5. So at this point, let's go to, this is Josephus. And this is Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, book 1, chapter 2, we're going to look at. We've already looked at the first part of it. And let's see here. Lamech also was the father of a daughter whose name was Naamah. We just ended that with the Genesis. And because he was so skillful, he being Lamech, was so skillful in matters of divine revelation, that he knew he was to be punished for Cain's murder of his brother. He made that known to his wives. Seems like I'm missing something here. Okay, we'll get back to it. Nay, even while Adam was alive, it came to pass that the posterity of Cain became exceedingly wicked, everyone successfully dying, one after the other, more wicked than the former. There was they were intolerable in war, vehement in robberies. And if anyone were slow to murder people, yet was he bold in his behavior, in acting unjustly and doing injuries for gain. So the Cainites got worse and worse and worse. So here's what it says here, and this is an interesting part here. Now Adam, who was the first man, had been made out of the earth, for our discourse must now be about him. Because we've got through creation, and we're going to start talking about the genealogies. After Abel was slain, Cain fled away. On the account of his murder, his solicitous, was solicitous for posterity, and vehement desire for children, he being 230 years old. Now, at this point, he's going by the Greek New Testament, or the Greek, rather, Old Testament, the Septuagint. In the Septuagint, where we have Adam was 130 when he had Seth, the Septuagint will say 230. So that's a major discrepancy. And when we look at the Dead Sea Scrolls and all the other things that we can do to check the dates, the Hebrew text comes out to be the very clear explanation. Because you have in Samuel and in Joshua a quote out of Scripture that says, if you need more information, check this against the book of Jasher. So when you look at the book of Jasher and it says it was 130 years, and the Hebrew version says it was 130 years, and the Greek says it was 230 years, you know which text is correct. Because both the Greek Septuagint and the Hebrew Old Testament in those places are going to say, check these texts, these dates, by the book of Jasher. So very, very specific, very easy. Anyway, so it should be 130 years old. After which time he had lived, and he lived another 700 or more, and then died, he had indeed many other children. So many other children, but Seth in particular. As for the rest, it would be too tedious to name them. And I want to stop there for a minute and just look at this. To make a comment like that, just think about it. He's had many other children. You know this how? Somehow. Seth in particular, and I want to talk about Seth. As for the rest, all those other kids that he had, it would be tedious to name them. Okay, tedious means it would be really a long process. It would be really tiring. Tedious, not impossible, tedious. So that means somewhere there's a long list of genealogy names that would be tedious for us to teach on. So in Josephus's day, I just want you to put that in your mind. In Josephus's day, there was a list of all of Adam's kids and the different tribes and things that happened. Not just the Cainites and the Sethites, but all the other ones. So this is another example of there are many, many ancient records. So just pointing that out to you. Thought that was interesting. It'd be tedious to name them all. Okay, I will therefore only endeavor to give an account for those that proceeded from Seth. So we're going to talk about the Sethites. Now, this Seth, when he was brought up, he became to those years which he could discern what was good and from evil. He became a virtuous man, and he was himself of an excellent character, and so did leave children behind him who imitated his virtues. So Seth was godly, like Abel probably would have been if he would have lived long enough. So Seth and his people were godly. Cain and his people became more and more wicked, specifically because of what the fallen angels did. And we'll get to that anyway. Remember, this is a large synopsis. Okay, so right here it says, and these proved to be of good dispositions. They inhabited the same country without dissensions, in a happy condition, without any misfortunes falling upon them until they died. They also were the inventors of a particular sort of wisdom. Let me stop there for a minute. This thing here, saying that they inhabited the same country, the same area, without any problems, without any wars, without any major quarreling, without any major, this kind of stuff, in a happy condition, without any misfortunes falling upon them until they die. So that would be partially the blessing of the Lord, but also how would that start? Remember, we read in here that the original way is the way of simplicity. And if you've read anything of the the testaments of the patriarchs, that's a lifestyle where your family, your clan, your group, the bigger it is, the easier it is, takes care of everything. The babies, of course, need taken care of by mom. The elder, the parents, the great-great-grandparents, when they get to a place where they can't do much, they're set, on a pedestal, should be, but they're set down and they do what they can, and the main people do the work. And everybody is fed, and everybody's clothed, and everybody has a roof over their heads, either tents or caves or something, and everybody gets along. Now, Cain, on the other hand, invented weights and measures and money and a system by which he could cheat people. You can only have food if you have money to buy it. You have to work for me. Well, that's just a different system, but that system is easy to manipulate with taxes and other things. And so he ends up getting richer and richer and richer. You can have somebody work all day to make food, and then you pay them, a dime or whatever, and you get everything you want. And this creates dissension and unrest. People say that their government is unfair, taxes are too high, and revolution occurs. And there's always something. The Sethites didn't have this. And some people look at this and say, well, that sounds like communism. Not exactly. It's a little different in a family aspect. It's the way it used to be. It was a life of simplicity, according to the testaments of the patriarchs. Just wanted to kind of put that in. So anyway, so this part here, this is interesting. They were the inventors, the Sethites, were the inventors of a particular sort of wisdom, which is concerned with the heavenly bodies and their order. Now, this isn't astrology, because astrology is fake. This is calendars, how to calculate things, making sure you understand the precession of the equinoxes and how the calendar handles it, and the understanding of the calendar, those kind of things. And prophecy too, because it's connected with it. They were the inventors of a particular sort of wisdom connected with the heavenly bodies and their order. And so their inventions may not be lost before they were sufficiently known. So they're going to do something, write these down so that it doesn't get lost, okay? The reason they think it might get lost is because Adam gave a prophecy. Now let's look at this for a second. Upon Adam's prediction that the world was be destroyed by, let's look at this part right here. Adam's prediction that the world would be destroyed at one time by a force of fire, and at another time by violence and a quantity of water. And when we look this up in Jasher, we will later, when we get past, up to Seth and his descendants, Canaan is the one that began to study prophecy and figured out that the flood would come first. Basically, Adam had a prediction. Somehow he knew, and the Lord revealed it to him, that the world would be destroyed once by a flood of water, once by a rain of fire, which is what we see. And Peter talks about that in 1 Peter 5, the fact that people that don't believe in a coming destruction of fires because they're willingly ignorant that the flood already occurred. So if one prophecy is true, the other prophecy is true. But this is interesting. Again, look at this carefully. Adam predicted this. How does Josephus know that Adam predicted anything unless it was written down? So we're told, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, that all the patriarchs wrote testaments. And that's from Adam all the way forward to Aaron, Moses' brother, that starts that particular priesthood or age. So each and every one of these, and we have, that should be about 40 some testaments at least. And we have fragments of at least 22 of them in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are pretty interesting. We don't have anything from Adam, but this here tells us that Adam wrote down a prediction. And we do have the testament of Enos, which is Adam and then Seth. And of course, we're being told here that Seth and his group made writings about the celestial events. So that's Adam, Seth, and then Enos. There's actually a piece of Enos's testament in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then, of course, we're told later in another book that Canaan understood the prophecies and he wrote things down. So that gives us either a quote, an actual piece of the Testament, or a quote at least, knowing that they used to exist, of the first four patriarchs: Adam, Seth, Enos, and Canaan. And then you get down a couple more to Enoch. So it'd be interesting to see these things, just letting you know that. So I think one of the questions I was looking at earlier is going to be, were there extra history texts that Moses drew from to write this? Yes, obviously so. And that's things that nobody ever talks about for some reason. You do have to be careful, because just because something says it's the book of Jasher or the Testament of Adam or whatever doesn't mean it is. So you have to compare it closely to Scripture and see if there's any discrepancies. So anyway, so let's go on. So they were the inventors of a particular sort of wisdom connected with the heavenly bodies and their order. And so their inventions would not be lost before they were sufficiently known upon Adam's prediction that the world would be destroyed at one time by a force of fire and another time by a violence and quantity of water. Because of that, they made two pillars, one out of brick and the other out of stone. So in other words, the idea, if the flood came first, the brick would dissolve in the water, the stone would not. And if the fire came and it was hot enough to actually melt things, I'm not sure how bricks would fare with that, but the idea of a brick and a stone in case of whichever happens. That's what I was told anyway. So anyway, one out of brick and one out of stone, these two pillars, and they inscribed their discoveries on them both. In case the pillar of brick should be destroyed by a flood, the pillar of stone might remain. And exhibit those discoveries to mankind. So they should understand a calendar and other stuff. Now look at this. Remember, this is being written by Josephus in 70 AD. So only 2,000 years ago, not 3 or 4 or 5,000 years, just 2. Look at this last part. And also to inform them that there was another pillar of brick erected by them. So there's some sort of a stone pillar with some sort of writing or something on it that tells you about the celestial events, which would be mainly the calendar, maybe other things too, but the calendar is the basis for the celestial bodies, for the prophecies, for that kind of stuff. So that was done in these two. So the brick may have been destroyed in the flood, but the stone one would not have been. And look what it says here, this last part right here. The pillar of stone that the Sethites left that has all this information on it or in it or something. This remains in the land of Sirad to this day. Josephus was aware about it and where it was at and probably how to read it in his day in 70 AD. So this is interesting. So this is connected with Adam's testament about future prophecies. Now we already know there was a flood and there's a fire judgment coming. So we're not learning any new prophecies from it. But what we are learning is that there apparently are a lot of extra biblical writings that we probably ought to get a hold of and pay attention to if it's possible, if they still exist. And apparently in 2,000 years ago, they were abundant and well known to scholars anyway, anybody that studied all the scrolls. So very, very interesting. So we'll go ahead and stop there. And next time we will get back to chapter 5 will start next time, and that'll give us the genealogies. We'll backtrack a little bit and start filling in the gaps with some more of the different things, some Dead Sea Scrolls, more from Josephus, Jasher, Jubilees, Seder Olam, early church fathers, Dead Sea Scrolls. And if there's anything else that I forgot, but we'll get through them. So now we'll go ahead and stop for tonight. We'll go through go to the chat room and see if there's any questions. Hope you're liking these studies. If you do, give us a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. From what I understand, is as soon as we get past 100,000 people, the algorithms are quite a bit different, so we're trying to get there. We're at 93,000 something, so we only need like a little less than 7,000 new members, not members, subscribers rather. So, okay. So I always do this wrong. Let me do this way, and then we'll start looking at these. Okay. That just gets me out of the way and we can see it easier. I can see it easier. Became a member, level angel. Welcome aboard. You'll be able to get in the chat room and ask questions. So thank you for being with us. Question. Tim Chafee was on Pete Garcia's channel last week and said that the book of Jasher is fake. What is the history of the book that we have now? Thanks. Well, there's at least 3 of them, and 2 of them are definitely fake. You can't trace them back further than the Middle Ages. That doesn't necessarily mean a lot, though, but it's at least back to the Middle Ages. And when you read them, they're nothing like what's talked about. When you look at Joshua and Second Samuel, anyway, Samuel and Joshua, the 2 quotes about that. If you look at my book, it says, quoted in, and it gives you those references. Anyway, it talks about Joshua holding or asking the Lord and the sun standing still, and then David instructing the Judahites, I think, or one of the tribes, to use the bow, the song of the bow. And so none of that is in any of these other things, although they are in the book of Jasher that we have. And so the whole story, it's basically the same one that's in Joshua, about when they've been doing battle, and the Lord, he commands the sun and the moon to stand still, and it does until they destroy their enemies. And then the song of the bow, people say, well, that's not in Jasher either. There's no music. And it's an idiom. The song of the bow is the way of the bow. You can do it different ways. And it means that each one of the tribes, like the Spartans, each one of the 12 tribes were to specialize in a certain type of warfare. So the Judahites, for instance, were supposed to be archers. And that's all they did, is archery. And if that's all you do all day long, you are the best at it. One tribe had a cavalry. One tribe were swords and shields, One tribe was something else. I'm sure it might have been Benjamin, somebody did the slingshot. Those things are very deadly, but you have to practice at them. And there's no sense of practicing slingshot and bow and arrow and swords. Just pick one. And so that's what David had commanded, that as recorded in Jasher, that each one was supposed to do that. So he instructed each one to start getting really good at their form of martial art or whatever. So anyway, the book that we have goes back to the Middle Ages also. I'm not sure how further back as far as copies go. Again, that doesn't mean anything. That's at least Middle Ages. So I don't know. He may have been throwing them all together. Some of them are definitely fake. They contradict scripture. This one does not. But there's a famous rabbi, Eliezer, who quotes Jasher. And actually, this came to my mind the other day. There's actually a couple of different rabbis named Eliezer. One's in the Middle Ages, but one's a first century rabbi. Anyway, so that means this is quoted in the 1st century. The legend is that it came from the temple. Right before the temple was besieged, it was people that believed the prophecies. They took all the extra biblical books that they could and went to different places. And so that particular group goes to Spain. So it's been among the Spanish, the Sephardic Jews, for about 2,000 years. That's about as far back as we could trace any copy of it. So it could easily be fake if you're just looking at that, because it should go back. It was written in the time of Joshua. So we're talking about approximately 3,500 years ago. And it's in its current state. I do have the Hebrew version of it. So if it's in its current state, that dates back to at least the copy we have, Middle Ages, but quotes from it back 2,000 years, as far as at least 2,000 years. And then who knows what the rest of it. But it's the same thing. It's the same kind of argument you could use, like, how do we know the Bible hasn't been tampered with or is made up or a piece of it's different or whatever? Well, you can go back to the Aleppo Codex at 1000 AD and know that nobody's tampered with it at all from 1000 AD forward. Then the Dead Sea Scrolls come along. Now all of a sudden we have large sections of every book, except for Esther, and a total number that date back to 1 to 200 BC. So we go at least 1,000 to 1,200 years earlier and still no changes. So that's good, but we still don't know, like Isaiah, Zephaniah, one of the minor prophets, in the first 500 years may have changed or been tampered with. You don't know. You can't prove or disprove anything like that. So same kind of a thing. So this is at least that far. What I would do, rather than argue the earliest copy we have is this, therefore it has to be only that amount old, is to say that it's at least that old and to compare it with Scripture. And that takes a lot of time and energy, so I can understand people not wanting to do that. But like I say, if you look at these other versions and you compare them to Scripture, just in the first chapter, you can tell these things are just really weird, way off. So anyway, the two fake ones. So anyway, he may have been talking about that. He may just not know about it, whatever. One of the things too is that each one of these books has things that might be embellishments. So, they're not Scripture, and it's been a long, long time. Very easy for somebody to add or take away from or whatever, or translate wrong. So we have to be careful of that. Anyway, hopefully that answers your question. Super Chat 49. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the donation. Thank you for supporting our ministry. It helps a lot. We're going to continue doing this study in Genesis, but when we get done with it sometime next year, we'll get back to doing the Hebrew New Testament. And I think that's going to be interesting. Just as a piece of information, we're starting at the end and kind of going back. So we started with Jude and 3rd John, which are done, and 1st and 2nd John are just about done. And we're working on 1st and 2nd Peter at the moment. So we're kind of going backwards. The next book we want to put out, we've put out 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, so those are done. The next book we want to do is the general epistles. There's some really interesting insights to prophecy in Peter, actually 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd Thessalonians, definitely. And John has some interesting things to it. So it'll be really interesting to see. Okay, let's see here. What other books did Moses have access to when he wrote the Pentateuch? If he incorporated text from them, could this explain multiple author hypotheses that exist? Yeah, that very well could be. Yeah, when you're wanting to quote something perfectly like that. Yeah, very well. I think people make way too much of it too. When you look at the Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, and the way they call God, the name that they call him in the 2 shows that it was written differently, and it could be by different people, or it could be the same guy after even a few years. I think the way I write now is probably quite a bit different than the way I wrote when I started. And I started back in 2000, I want to say 2006 or 2007, something like that. So it's been at least 15 years. And so if my writing style is different in any way, then everybody else's would be too. So yeah, that he would have access to a lot of stuff. So we have, I don't know that we have a whole lot of the original stuff. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have the Testaments of the Patriarchs, what's left of them. So those would have been actual historical documents from way back in the day, from Adam forward. Josephus and the Seder Olam were written, well, the Seder Olam was written about 160. Josephus is written around 70 AD, both of those AD. Jasher, about 1500 BC. Enoch, it's been through several different translations, and there's definitely places in there that the numbers are off. So you're not sure what else is off, but the basic stories are the same, quoted by church fathers. Church fathers wrote a lot about that stuff. Was it Josephus? I think it was Josephus that made a comment talking about the Exodus. He said that there was a historian named Berosus that compiled all the ancient histories. He was a Chaldean, a Babylonian. And to give you an idea, I was taken back at this whole idea where he says it was in the 60, Josephus says this about Berosus, the historian, in his volume of history, in the 69th volume, he mentions the Exodus from Egypt under Moses. So that means there's 68 books that deal with history that's pre-Moses. That's a lot of history. And there's actually still a lot of history like that. There's in England, I forget the name of it, but there is a 100-volume encyclopedia written in an eclectic form of very old English. Very few people can even read it. But it's all the history from creation to when the Saxons invaded. That was my understanding. And I would love to look at the very, very beginning parts and see how it talks about angels and Moses and things like that. Anyway, so there are things that are still around that we would really love to look at. Hopefully that answers your question. In the Peshitta, is the Peshitta what the people of Jesus' day would have read in Hebrew? The Peshitta is actually in Aramaic, so very well could have been. Just like we have older Greek manuscripts, newer Greek manuscripts, and we have the critical text and the received text and the majority text and the new majority text, different families of manuscripts. You also have the same thing in the Aramaic. So the Peshitta, if you look closely at it, is Aramaic and it's got some good stuff to it. But if you look closely, you can tell that it has been translated from Greek, or parts of it at least. And trying to think, I haven't done that much study into it, but Nehemiah Gordon, takes me a while to bring these names up, was talking about his conversations with one of the top rabbis of the Samaritans, and there's not that many of them left. And the Samaritans basically, this rabbi basically said, yeah, same thing. It's been translated from the Greek back into Aramaic. And they believe Aramaic was the original. And that's, their minority idea. But even at that, they'll say the Peshitta is not it. And they go by an older version of the Aramaic text that's pre-Peshitta. Peshitta is 2nd century somewhere. And it's the same thing. We've got a lot of Hebrew texts that are backwards translated from Greek. Greek seems to be the standard. And the ones that we're working on now, not so much. So that would be kind of interesting. But we have Peshitta and Old Aramaic. We have the Vulgate and Old Latin. And we have the Peshitta and Old Aramaic. I said that. And we have the same kind of thing with the Coptic and the Georgian and a few other languages. So there's the polished version, and then there's the pre-polished version, which would probably be really interesting to look at both of those, actually. If I only had a few more 100 years, this would be fun. But anyway, the basic idea, and I don't know how we could prove or disprove this either, but the basic idea is that they kept Hebrew as the sacred text, read and thought about Hebrew in the synagogues. At home, common language is still Aramaic, which is a sister language to Hebrew. In business, they would be using Greek, just like buying things at the store. And then dealing with the government, it would be the Romans were there, so it would be some Latin. So those would be the main languages that they would do. So became a member level angel. Welcome aboard. That'll get you in the chat room and we'll have some good conversations. Thank you for supporting us. If a believer has turned apostate and unrepentant and we turn away, but then the person enters dementia, is it okay for us to turn back and help them with their health care? That's a really good question. If they're a family member, you really should be taking care of them anyway. Um, I mean, unless they're a danger or detriment to your other family. So, like if you have a child predator, a drunk, somebody that uses drugs and won't stop, and you have little kids, no, you can't do that. So that's interesting. Turned apostate. Yeah, the dementia actually changes a lot. I had a similar thing, just kind of the opposite in my family. My mom and dad were Christians, were serious about scriptures. And then they got to where they didn't apostatize, but they got where they didn't care that much, which I thought was odd. And then I realized, they were just changing, because pretty soon they were not interested in the stuff they used to be either. And then pretty soon they didn't even remember being interested in that at all. Then pretty soon they don't know who they are, that kind of thing. So it's a really slippery slope. So yeah, I would probably, if it's not going to be a burden to you, a danger to your kids or something like that, definitely try to help them. And you never know. I mean, the Lord may allow something like that for them to forget the arguments they had about why they want to apostatize, and they might turn back to the Lord. You just never know. Hopefully that helps a little bit. Chat, $50 donation. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for sharing these studies with us. Well, I'm glad you like them. And thank you so much for supporting the ministry. Do you think we can include a massive recent biblical archaeology as the ancient one speaking from the dust? Seems that discoveries are exponential. I believe so too. There's one text, and I'd have to find it now, but in one of the Dead Sea Scroll fragments that talks about same kind of stuff, the speaking out of the dust of the earth, which would be scrolls, especially if the scrolls are talking about them. But it didn't say it directly, but it kind of indicated that the main part of that would be in the last generation. The last generation doesn't start until March of 2026. The last Jubilee period is what they would be referring to. So since we've had the Dead Sea Scrolls, 1948, I don't know if there was any in the 60s. Well, it's been 12 caves. So in the 80s, and then all the way up to the 90s, and then a couple of years back in cave 12. So over a period of 70 years. So the last two Jubilees, this has been going on. And we've got a lot of stuff, but they're highly fragmented. So if I'm reading that right, we should have a really good, solid amount of scrolls discovered in the next few years, or in the next 10 years, something like that. It'll be really interesting. So yeah, I would consider all that. One of the things I've been doing is you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls proper, and that's just the text that came out of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Qumran and that area that they dug up that's definitely ancient. And so you pull all that together, look at the theology, and then they will talk about extra biblical books. Like Peace of Jubilees and Enoch was found there, but if you didn't found anything, it still talks about it. So you'd go hunting it, and you'd go wind up to the Ethiopian canon and get Jubilees and Enoch and things like that. So they mention like the people that ran the school of the prophets, Nathan, Ahijah, Shemaiah, Niddo, and Gad. And we managed to track those down and managed to get Gad. So Gad now has been published. So Gad is not, the book of Gad that we have is not a Dead Sea Scroll, but referenced by Dead Sea Scrolls and church fathers. So it's just one of those things, just going out. So they talk about certain things. If we can go find the rest of the story, that would be good. Again, always look at those things with a grain of salt, because it's been so long, it could very easily have been added to or changed or something like that. Is it possible when Cain's offering was rejected that he was rejected for the Melchizedekian priesthood? Probably. The Lord said if he does well, it would be good for him. So it very well could be, though. Can you remind us of who the Melchizedekian priests were before Jesus? I have a list of them, but it's Melchizedekian priest is a king, priest, and prophet all put together. And the reason why it was forbidden is when you get down to the time of Jacob, he breaks the Melchizedekian priesthood up into a king line, a priest line, and a prophet line. So Levi takes the priest, and the king line goes through Judah. And that's why it was so dangerous, all these kings wanting to do priestly stuff. It amounts to saying that you're the Messiah. You're putting everything back together. You're the one and only. And that's blasphemous. And the Lord gave many of those leprosy, things like that. So the one priesthood with 3 offices in one, and they break up into 3 separate offices until they come back. So I don't remember all of them, but it would have been Adam, and then he handed the government over to Canaan. We'll see that in a week or two. And then Canaan handed it over to, I believe, Enoch, the people that did the revivals. And then Enoch handed it to Methuselah and was raptured. Methuselah handed it to Noah. Noah handed it to Shem. Shem, the Melchizedekian priesthood in Genesis 14, would have handed it to Abraham, who gave it to Isaac, who gave it to Jacob. And Jacob's the one who broke it up. So all in all, I think there are 10, if I remember correctly. It's in our book, The Ancient Order of Melchizedek. So hopefully that helps. It's fascinating to study those things. A reoccurring theme in the Bible is younger brother receiving the blessing. Is there a common understanding as to who is represented by the older and younger brothers? Not that I know of. There is definitely a pattern like that. And I think it's the main pattern is like who is the more godly, right? So for instance, in the case of Isaac and Jacob, Jacob and Esau, Esau was told to be a man who could care less about God. There's a whole chapter about his attitude and beliefs and stuff like that. Totally secular guy, did not care. Jacob was a man of the tents, and the man of the tents it doesn't mean weakling or sickly. It means you prefer to spend your time in a library studying, or in your tent reading the scrolls, rather than out trapping animals or farming or whatever. So it's an idiom for one who loves the scriptures and loves the Lord, as opposed to one who doesn't. And so you can look at that and see that Esau, just flat like Cain, did not care, and Jacob did. Now Jacob committed some pretty bad things, trying to steal the birthright. I mean, that can be considered a capital offense back in the day. So he did some things that were not right, but he cared, he believed. David murdered Uriah, or had Uriah murdered rather, but he believed. That's the whole point. Some of these people may not even be that bad. They might actually be better, but they don't believe. And salvation is based upon belief and your love of God. So I don't know if there's a pattern like that or not, but that would be interesting to kind of look at. Gifted a membership level angel. Welcome aboard, and thank you for gifting the membership. How do we know that the Dead Sea Scroll calendar is the right calendar to watch for prophecy? The only thing it could do is to put it together and then go back in time and look at some of the major events that have to be prophetic and see if they occur in different eras. I mean, if there's any patterns. And then if their patterns are there, then you know the calendar is correct. That's how I would do it. As an example, the Yom Kippur War was on Yom Kippur in 1973 on the modern Jewish calendar. So if you look at that on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, that was the third, I think it's second or third, I think it's the third of Tabernacles. Yeah, Tabernacles. So it was the third of Tabernacles. And then if you look at the Hamas attack, which was October 7th, if you look at that and put it on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, same date. It's not the same date on the modern Jewish calendar, Gregorian, Julian, Arabic, Muslim, or any other calendar that I know, but it is on that one. So just kind of an interesting thing like that. And there's some debate. Nobody debates the calendar sequencing, but people debate on when the leap years should be. So if the leap years are next year and I do it this year, this particular year, I'm going to be off a couple of days. So there's a lot of stuff to study, but that's basically, I think, how we would do that is compare it and see what kind of prophetical outlines. If it seems to be more accurate, then it's probably the one, or we're probably doing it right. For texts like Jasher, etc., that include details not in Scripture, do we find archaeological evidence of those details? I know about the Talmud of Gilgamesh demanding kingship for Noah. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I'm not sure. I haven't really looked at it that way. There are guys that would, like for instance, there's guys that spend most of their lives digging and trying to prove the Exodus actually happened. And they have some pretty good evidence for it. And I've always been the kind of guy that I just accept that it happened. I'm not trying to prove it to anybody. I'm not evangelistic in that respect, trying to prove things and get people saved. I'm more of talking to people that are already believers. If there are some evidence, that would be good. And if not, my question would be like, is there any other possible evidence that has other stories, more details, just so we could learn more? So everybody's got their own, I guess, calling for that. So the people that can dig in archaeology and prove things, that's fantastic. So I would think so. Jasher, going back that far, is mainly working with, I don't know that there's anything in there that you could try to pull out like that, like a certain name of a certain city that nobody thought existed, now it's been proven or something like that. That would be interesting to look into, though. Is Jesus being literal or using an idiom by the phrase under the fig tree to Nathan? I don't really know. I've heard that it's an idiom for seeing everything that you're doing or studying. And I don't know, because he could have passed by and said that. But in context, it almost has to be an idiom, because if I was to come by and say, you're Nathan, and I know you're studious because I saw you studying under that apple tree over there. Okay, so you're observant. That doesn't mean anything. But Nathan, all of a sudden, it's like, you must be the Christ. So in other words, of course, it might have been more to that, but he basically talked like, I know you, and I know there's no guile in your mouth, and I saw you studying under the fig tree. And I've heard that that is a phrase for meaning being in the millennial reign, in the kingdom. I'm not sure if that's the case or not, because in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the olive vine is Israel when it's messianic, and the fig tree is when it's apostate, when Israel is apostate. So saying, I saw you under the fig tree, I'm not sure really what that would mean, but it seems like it very easily could be symbolic of something. Good question. If you ever figured out, let me know. Or if you think you figured it out based on some scroll or Josephus or some historical thing, let me know. Became an angel level or member level angel. Thank you. Welcome aboard. The second great destruction, the one by fire, as opposed to the great deluge, is going to be during the tribulation or at the end of the millennial reign of Christ. Seems like we're talking about the vast majority of everything being destroyed by fire at the end of the tribulation period. Of course, at the end of the millennial reign, there's a new heavens and a new earth. So I don't know if they're similar or both or what. But the way Peter describes it seems to be talking about the tribulation period. One of the things about that is kind of interesting If you look at, for instance, it says 1/4 of the land, and presumably that means the globe, is destroyed. Then there's another plague where 1/3 is destroyed. So if you're taking 4 pieces and 1/4 is destroyed, that leaves 3. And out of the 3, 1/3 is destroyed, that leaves 2 of the original. So just between those 2 judgments, half of the population of planet Earth is gone. And then things heat up and get really bad. So if you think about it like that, there's a lot of destruction. Okay, let's see here. Where is modern day Sirad? It's Egypt. Don't know much about it as far as like probably Middle Egypt, in the middle between the two, like where the pyramids are, somewhere in that area. Some people actually think the pyramids, like the Giza pyramid, might actually be that because it's between the two, and there's some evidence to think it might be a pre-flood monument. So, but whether it is or not, I don't know. But Sirad is down in the area of Egypt. So I don't know if anybody's actually discovered where it's at for sure, but it's interesting to have these pieces of information. Super Chat, $5. Thank you very much. Thanks for your work. Sometime in the future, would you consider advising on a movie I'm hoping to make? Got to save up my money first. Possible. We'll see what I can do. Yeah, anything I can do to help you, figure stuff out or make it look better or whatever. Do you think the information in stone in Sirad would be passageways in the construction of the Great Pyramid? One of my professors actually taught that, and he started off really good until you get to the antechamber. I forget how that goes. The first parts seem to be perfect. I mean, it actually seemed to fit. Like there's a mark of where if you do it like an inch to a year and start at the base and go up, there's a scorched line or a mark, which would be about the place of the, I forget how that, I don't remember now, it's been so long. But they seem to indicate like the flood and other things when the pyramid was built, and then go up to the time of Paul in the antechamber. And then, but see, then it seems like everything gets off. It seems like Christianity would go another 18,000 years or something like that. It just seems something is amiss. But yeah, it's possible. And it's possible rather than the inches in there and the marks and the passages and stuff, that maybe there actually was documents in the king and queen's chambers, for instance, and we don't know for sure. And it may not even be that, but it's something to look into. Like I say, I had a professor that was very much a pyramidologist, a good guy, loved the Lord, but very interesting ideas. Yeah, there's 2 or 3 really good books on the pyramid, and I don't really remember them. It's been a long time since I was in college. Have you heard about the work written by Philo called The Life of Moses? Is there any truth to it? Never read it myself. I have never heard of it. There's Philo, and then there's Pseudo-Philo, which people try to say is, a different guy. May or may not be, like Pseudo-Ephraim. So I don't know. I've never read it. Also, remember when they're pseudo, they're saying that this person didn't write it. It doesn't mean that it's totally fake. It was probably written in that same time period by someone else. And so that's what happened, for instance, with Pseudo-Ephraim. That's one of the manuscripts in the not Middle Ages, the 3rd century, I think, that very clearly teaches a pre-trib rapture. And people like to point out the fact that it's Pseudo-Ephraim. It's probably fake. It's like, well, what does pseudo mean? And in that particular case, what you have is you've got 2 church fathers that say it was written by Ephraim of Syria. And one church father quotes it very at length, so he's very clearly quoting it. He quotes it and said it was written by Isidore of Seville. Okay. So my point is, who cares? It was either written by Ephraim or by Isidore. Same time period. Somebody back there believed in a pre-trib rapture. I mean, that's all there is to it. You can't say it was fake, made up yesterday. It's obviously a third century document. And we have things like that. So when you talk about pseudo-Philo, for instance, maybe it wasn't Philo, but it was somebody back in that day. So it would still be interesting to see what it teaches. Okay, Life of Moses. I'll have to look into that. So thank you very much. I've heard that Matthew and Hebrews was written in Hebrew first. Are you planning on translating them from the Hebrew language as well? Yes, and yes. The church fathers talk about Matthew writing his gospel originally in Hebrew to his brethren, and then of course it was translated into Greek. And everybody tries to say, well, which one is the original? Probably both of them. Remember, these guys had the gift of tongues, gift of languages. And even if it was before that, if he writes the Gospel of Matthew in his native tongue, I don't see, if he's got time, why he wouldn't turn around and write it in Hebrew, Greek, Latin even, and do that. If I was bilingual, I would be writing my books in English and in Spanish. And you'd say, well, who translated them? Nobody, really. I did, but I just wrote them and then rewrote them. So, and I think that's probably why we don't have any things like any church fathers saying it was rewritten or translated by this guy at this time, because they tend to be really specific like that. And yet when it comes to that stuff, there's no records. So very, very possible. We don't know that that's the case. But yeah, that was, and then the book of Hebrews, one of the church fathers talked about it. It's supposed to have been written to the temple priests. And that makes sense looking at the context. He's saying, look, you know about the law, the Sabbath, the law of Moses, angels, the priesthood, the Levitical versus Melchizedekian, you know this quote and that quote from Scripture. And he's trying to say all of these point to Messiah. And here's a scripture that shows Messiah is superior to Moses, because Moses said he'll raise one up and you listen to him, whatever he says. Well, that means he's superior to Moses. And he goes through all these scriptures. The Sabbath is, the Messiah is superior to the Sabbath, to Moses, to the Levitical priesthood, to the priestly offerings, to the angels even, to this, to that, and the other thing. And so, and he basically ends by saying, the Pharisee way of looking at it, the Sadducee way of looking at it, and the Essene way of looking at it. You were here when the Messiah came, and you probably thought he was fake, but he raised the dead, he resurrected, everyone saw him, we're all believers. So you need to make a decision, because just like we were talking about, if the flood occurred, then that means the fire is coming. So if the prophecies about the Messiah's first coming, death, burial, resurrection, starting a new age, all this stuff is real, there's also in that set of prophecies the destruction of the temple. So if you've seen all of these come to pass, you have to know that the temple is going to be destroyed. And if you look at the calendar, he was writing this somewhere in the 50s. So basically in the next 15 years or less, that temple will be destroyed. And if you're still there defending the law of Moses, you're going to be destroyed as well. So you have less than 15 years to get your act together and to become a Christian. Of course, he's saying it nicer than that, but that's basically what he's saying in Hebrews. So that does make it sound like he's writing to temple priests, this better than the sacrifices and all that. So very, very interesting. Nobody has said it, but looking at the language of Revelation, that's possible too, just the way that it's written. So anyway, we'll find out. Right now we're going through, we want to go through Romans to Jude, all the epistles, and then probably Revelation. And I've already looked at some of the manuscripts, and John especially, the Gospel of John, really interesting in Hebrew. So anyway, and then there's Matthew, and I have Mark. I don't think I have anything with Luke in it, though. Anyway, so Luke or Acts, except for, well, I do have one manuscript. That's right. So anyway, yeah, we're planning on doing that. It's probably going to take us a while. I wish I could speed things up. I'm always trying to think of some other way to speed it up. And we've got a system now which is going to keep us going at a good speed, but we want to be very, very thorough too. So pray for my son and myself and other people in the team that are working on these things, that we can get it done accordingly. Another question popped in. Let's see about this one. The cities God ordered Joshua for Haram or destruction, they were exclusively giant clans or mixed with humans. Thinking of Jericho and Rahab. I think, yeah, as far as I know, there were probably human settlements on top of Nephilim mounds or whatever. And I don't know if there's any truth to sorcery per se, as far as that goes. If there's any truth to it at all, I think it would work better with Nephilim stuff than human stuff. And so it could be that these people were trying to bring back or reproduce certain things from that era. And then, of course, that's why Jericho was cursed and that kind of stuff. Yeah, but there's a lot, and I haven't seen them, but there's a lot of people, L.A. Marzulli and others, that talk about when you look at the ruins of Jericho, you can tell the top layer was made by people, normal bricks. You go down so far and you've got those big really large stones that are probably Nephilim, because very few, I don't know how humans would move something like that, get it precise. So it looks like a human settlement on top of Nephilim stuff. So good question. Good point. Okay, we'll go ahead and stop there. I clicked on something for tonight, and we'll come back next week and probably pick up. Yeah, we'll pick up with chapter 5, unless there's something in the text we want to go over relating to the others. So we'll be doing a lot more from the text and very little from scriptures to kind of balance it out here in the near future, especially chapters 5 to 10. So it'll be fun, I think. So I will see you guys next week.